Hello, this is Karen Johnson with another of our series of oral histories collected by the Proctors History Committee. The date today is August 28th, 2017, and we're very pleased to have as our guest today Marilyn Sassi, who is everything history at Proctors.
Yeah.
And knows a tremendous amount about Proctors and the context, and we're just delighted to have you here, Marilyn. Tell me, how did you get to be a volunteer at Proctors? What were you thinking?
Yeah, well, it all started, I am thinking it was right about 12 years ago. A very dear friend of mine was a bartender, still is a bartender and a member of the guild. And she said, you know, you really should think about joining the guild and getting involved with the theater. And of course, I love the theater. My fondest memories as growing up, my beloved grandfather took me to the first movies here at the theater. I was probably 4 or 5 years old. I remember the first one was Song of the South, the Walt Disney. And then it was the Follow the Yellow Brick Road. My mind just, Wizard of Oz, thank you. And that was the second one. And then I had nightmares all night because the witch terrified me in that. But that was I had this real love affair with the theater, and thought it would be really, really lovely to come back to the theater and get involved. So I started with the guild and was here for a show and was looking through the playbill and noticed there was a little article about the history committee. And it said, if you are interested in joining the history committee, and I had no idea that the theater had a history committee, to call the chairman at the time, John Shear. And I had known John for years because I started out as curator at the Schenectady Historical Society back in 1980. And I was putting together a shaker exhibit and didn't have enough furniture. And John helped me, lent me furniture from the State Museum. And so I had known him for years. So I called. And when I discovered that Proctors had a history committee and a museum that had exhibits, I thought, this is for me, because my whole life had been revolving around history. And so I left the guild and became very much involved with the history committee. So that's how it started.
And what do you remember as one of your early projects?
Well, I remember exactly. I always loved, as being one of my favorite things about being a museum curator was the exhibits. I love doing exhibits. And the first thing that I noticed with the collections, while there were many, many photographs, and there were many newspaper articles, and there were documents and binders full of history notes, everything was paper. Nothing was color except for posters and playbills, but everything is flat. There was nothing three-dimensional. And the only thing that we could really do is rely upon John Shear to borrow things from the State Museum to give our exhibits a little life. So the Dr. Doolittle was on for this particular season, and I decided to do an exhibit on my own because I owned a book that had really wonderful early prints of the first Dr. Doolittle stories. So I matched the animals up. I got little composition animals and did an exhibit with color finally and animals. And it went over very well. And that was the beginning. But we were still very, very much in need of three-dimensional objects. Well, what happened couldn't have gone better. I have to back up for a minute because I realize I have to give you one more little piece of information. Nancy and Dick Lang were two of the original members of the History Committee, and Nancy Lang really did a lot with starting the tour program with public tours of the theater. And they were going to move to Texas, and she saw how very, very interested I was. And I, in addition to being a member of the History Committee, I started training to be a tour guide. And I went to every single tour to try to learn. And the information came very easily, but what didn't come easily, because you put me in a shopping mall and I'll get lost. I have a terrible sense of direction. I'd get lost up in the dressing rooms. And so it took me a long time to memorize how to go around and do a tour. But once that was accomplished, I started to do public tours. And this one particular tour, after the tour was finished, a very lovely young woman came up to me, introduced herself, and she said, you know, we love the tour. She was with family. She said, we have a very elderly family member who can't walk without a walker. He would love to come. You know, she said he collected theater memorabilia for years, and he was here all of the time, hanging out around the stage door, waiting for the stars that appeared here to come out to get autographs. Could you give him a tour? And I said, well, yeah, I'd be delighted. And so I set this tour up with Barbara Wright, and she brought her husband and son to help this family member, Jim Anderson. And I had no idea at that time what this was going to mean. And I gave him the tour, and they kind of carried him in places where he couldn't walk, but everything went really well, and he was thrilled. And then I got a call that Jim was going to be going to assisted living and would have to give up his whole collection that was going to go to auction. But before it went to auction, he was going to let the History Committee come and pick out objects that we might be able to use. Well, I will never forget. John Shear and Audrey Hughes and I went. He had a whole separate building. Never in a million years could we have dreamed, stacked from floor to ceiling, was every type of theater memorabilia you could ever imagine, plus the autographed pictures. And a lot of the things were collectors' series of dolls, like the Franklin Mint. Mm-hmm. Not dolls that children wouldn't play with, but collectors like Jim would buy of all of the famous stars. And we even had life-size statues like Charlie Chaplin, Eric Flynn, that we picked out, that we could do exhibits around. And that was the beginning. But now we had a very, very, very serious problem. The only storage that we had when I arrived here was a little narrow closet. The little museum was the original theater manager's office from 1926. And a lot of work had been done with it, turning one big closet into a wonderful, like a diorama setting of what one of the early dressing rooms looked like. The bathroom was still there, and this long, very, very narrow closet. So all we had for storage was this closet. You couldn't walk two abreast. It was so tiny, in a bathroom with the sink still in it and the toilet still in it. The shower stall was okay because we could pile things in the shower stall. Meanwhile, in addition to all of this, I am going around the theater with housekeeping and spotting original dressing tables. And one famous trip down in what the basement that everyone calls the tombs, we found some of the original chairs, all broken up, but they were down there, and we fished them all out. So now, and mirrors. So now what are we going to do about storage? because now the housekeeping crew, we're going to go to Jim Anderson's and bring all of the things we picked out. Now I have chairs that have to come out and be saved, and dressing tables and mirrors. What are we going to do? Well, when I first got here, when I was still just with the Guild, I was introduced to Dan Sheehan, and I remember going to his office, which you were still in the original offices that now are dressing rooms. But in the interim, as I'm working, everybody had to leave for the expansion, and you were now in 440. And so it was decided that we would be able to use a section of the basement in 440. So here we go. Thanks to housekeeping, we start dragging all of the things, and it's a steep stairs. There was an entrance in the back of 440, and we'd go down those stairs. But it was really nice because we had some lovely shelves and tables. We cleared everything out, and we had a lovely, lovely system. And all that was great up until 440 was sold. So now we had to start thinking, where are we going to go? And that was the beginning of, it was one of the most stressful times in trying to safeguard the collection, because once we were out of 440, there really was nowhere. Except temporarily we were given a dressing room for the GE Theater. So we stacked everything in there, but we needed a much more secure area. So then it was decided to put us down in the basement of the GE Theater. Well, the basement of the GE Theater was never really finished. It's like dirt. All I can tell you, if you spend any time down there, dust comes raising up from every surface. And those of us who are allergic to dust, like I am, would be really sick.
To put on those big masks
We
with the
did.
breathers.
We did have to put on masks, but we were still so sick, we had to come up with something else. And that is when we were given an area up above Key Bank. When the theater obtained Key Bank and broke through, we have storage at Key Bank, but that is always an ongoing issue.
And is all this material fitting in that space?
It's very complicated. For a while we thought we were perfect, but then we have a filmmaker now, Prince, who is working, and a lot of our storage was taken away from us. So we've been doing the very, very best we can with it, but that still is an ongoing issue that we need help with. But meantime, we keep expanding, because one of the things that we want very much to do is to obtain as much theater memorabilia as we possibly can. And two items that right now are in the arcade window, and I hope beyond hope that this gentleman is going to give them to us. They're on long-term loan. We've had them for years. One of them is a fan that was given to all the ladies in 1926 when the theater opened. And I love this fan. The front part of it has women from vaudeville, all famous women stars from vaudeville and silent film. One of them is Bibi Daniels, who was the star of Stranded in Paris, which was the first movie that showed here when the theater opened in 1926. But the opposite side, the reverse side of the fan, is this wonderful advertising from State Street, all the early stores. But the men weren't forgotten. They were all given a little gun, that's in the window, and you would pull the trigger on this little gun, and out of the muzzle of the gun would shoot a little dancing girl. And I've never
Guns
dared.
that shoot dancing girls? This is
Dancing
quite weird.
And I've never dared try to pull the trigger, but it's a dancing girl. And the thought that Mr. Proctor had these things given out in our very theater makes them so precious. The gentleman lives in Central Valley. His name is Herman Galbraith, and he has done extensive research on the Proctor family. They had a huge summer estate that is now owned by West Point. He really was able to pull strings and let the history committee visit. It was a wonderful experience. We went up there several times. Well, he's been on the internet buying memorabilia from the theater. So little by little, we started to find other things. And one of the marvelous things that came in just last summer, I got an email from Paul Kazee, who has a little office down in the arcade, is
the former box office.
Yes, right. And he's one of the house managers here. And he said, a woman came in and said to me that she has an original program when the theater opened, from the very first show. And he said, I'm sure you have many copies of it, but if not, maybe you'd want to get in touch with her. And I thought, oh my goodness. Not only did we not have it, we had no programs until the theater reopened in '79. We had nothing from the earlier period. I said, oh, I hope he got her phone number. So I ran down. I said, by any chance, do you have her phone number? And he hands it to me. He had taken her phone number down. When she brought that program, it was unbelievable. And in the arcade window, we have blow-ups of that program, listing Stranded in Paris and the 5 vaudeville acts, and also what I was never expecting. There is a message from Mayor Blessing, who was the mayor here at the time, welcoming Mr. Proctor here and saying how delighted he was with the theater opening here. And then on the other side of it is a signature of Frederick F. Proctor. And we had no signature of him, so that was great. And how the woman who donated it, I said, how did you ever find it? She came personally. She said, well, my daughter went to a garage sale here right in the area, and she purchased a box of old magazines. And in going through the magazine, she pulled out this program and thought maybe the theater would like it. And then the latest thing, I got an email from the same woman who said she'd been on eBay or one of the on internet and saw that there was a program that Mr. Proctor had put together as a souvenir for his first theater in New York City in 1902. Now, certainly it's not our theater, but it was one of the first theaters he ever opened. And I saw the amount on it, and we did a little juggling around, and we were able to obtain it. And the reason I wanted it so badly is what it told is something none of us ever knew, that not only was Mr. Proctor managing theaters, owning theaters, setting up the entertainment, but he was deeply involved at one time in producing everything. So for this 23rd Street Theater, he first of all would find a script that he liked for a show. He would get the musicians. He'd hire the actors and actresses. He'd even be involved with the costuming and scenery. And all of that is in this particular program, and it has pictures of all of the early actors and actresses that he hired. So that is the kind of thing that I think is wonderful, that we not only are trying to preserve what was here, but adding to it.
So the message from all of this is that if anyone is a history buff, and comes across any of this, that you would love to hear from them.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That's great. Well, I thought we'd talk a little bit about the tours, and I'd just like to make a shout out to Nancy and Dick Lang because of the extensive work
Yes.
they did in getting this program off the ground. I still have in my desk the complete script for people who are giving tours.
Yes,
and
that
it's,
original
it's
script.
very extensive, but when someone wants to know the history but a little more in depth, I've very often shared that with
Right,
them.
right.
So that was a real plus. And now you are running the tours. So
Yes.
if I wanted to go on a tour, what do I do?
Yes, for the tours, all you would have to do, and we do give tours for as little as one person. A lot of people don't realize that. You don't need a whole group to come through. If even an individual person would like a tour, we can set that up. It's a little more difficult these days because of the amount of shows that are on. But if you are patient and work with us, we can always fit in a tour. And you can either call the office, the theater office, or the box office. And both the secretary in the office and the box office have my phone number. And you simply call, or my email is given out. And you contact me, and then I set you up with a tour.
Now you do have public tours as well.
Yes, and we've been doing the last 3 or 4 years, we've been doing a public tour right around the time of Mr. Proctor's birthday. He was born on St. Patrick's Day. So we've been doing an annual birthday tour, which is a big public tour open to the public, every year.
So people could see there might be another public tour because sometimes
Yes.
they've been every couple months.
Exactly. Now there's another opportunity that is working. And it works well because, again, people who would like a tour on a specific time period, but if there's a show on, it can't be done. The theater has reserved Tuesdays. It isn't always the second Tuesday of the month. It varies, but every month, starting in September and running through June, there are organ concerts or organ demonstrations done by the Volunteer Organ Society that is here.
That are free.
That are all free, sponsored by MVP. And they have a full demonstration of the organ and a concert at 12 noon on a Tuesday. So what we've been doing is piggybacking a tour for those people because we realize the theater has been reserved anyway. And that's been working well. And it's nice to call so I can tell the tour guide who handles that, his name is Richard Reynolds, so that he knows that in addition to audience members, he might have a group that want to go through. So that's a possibility.
So if I want to get more involved in helping with tours, with learning about the history of Proctors, what do I do?
Again, all you need to do is call the box office or the main office of the theater, and my name would be given out, and I would certainly try to accommodate any volunteer interested in, well, for instance, we've had a number of new volunteers come in that really didn't want to do tours or did not want to come to history committee meetings every month, but wanted to just be a docent for the museum. And then they are trained, and that helps us out because we try to have the museum open for every show if we can.
I think it's interesting that there are quite a few ways you can participate in the history committee.
Oh, yes.
Being a docent in the little room.
Right. No, yeah, yeah.
Constructing a window.
Yes, because we do the arcade windows now. Yeah.
And you have two up right now, but usually you have one for
Yes.
sure, and sometimes two.
Right.
And they are very popular as far as People,
Every time I come in the theater, there's always people, and I love the fact that our windows are popular. And I just, I left 2 donors out, and I just want to mention them. And examples of what they gave us are in the windows now. They have been professors teaching history at SUNY Albany. It is the Cooperberg Endelman collection of posters. And the really wonderful ones are posters from the 30s. And we have one up now with Fanny Bryce. So some of them are original, some of them are reprints, but that poster collection is phenomenal. And that
and you
helps
can
us.
hear them on WAMC.
Yeah, yes.
So it brings it a little bit to life.
Exactly, exactly. So we are very indebted to them. And anybody who has given us any memorabilia, even a little, I'm forgetting their names, but a little tiny brass plate that says Proctors on one side and the other is a number. Well, it's a hat check. Well, even something as little as a hat check, it's memorabilia from our early history.
And then we could say, what's a hat check? Because we don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Well, Marilyn, thank you so much for being with us today. And I want to mention that this is another in the series of Proctor's History Oral History reports, saving all this great stuff for the future. And the date today is August 28th, 2017. I want to thank you for watching, and thank you for your interest in Proctors.